going to be the first episode in quite a while on the DevRev. So let me give you just a real brief recap of what's going on with the DevRev, and that way you can kind of know where we're at. And then I'm just going to jump in and probably piss a whole bunch of people off with my take on what's been going on Twitter with diversity and things like that. And I'll save all the caveats for when I get started with that. So the DevRev, initially I was trying to get a YouTube channel going, and I was thinking, okay, I'm going to make a whole bunch of videos every week and help people out, talk about careers and life and, all that kind of thing, where I was going to, help people with just figuring out what they have going on, answer questions people have about where their career's at, talk about personal fulfillment and things like that. And the problem was just sitting down and figuring out, okay, I got to do 5 videos this week, was just a little bit too much. However, these are topics that I really care about and that I really want to talk about. So I'm moving more toward a format that I'm much more familiar with, because I feel like this is something that I really do need to be covering, and that is kind of a blind spot in general within the community of people who are talking about developers and staying current and education and stuff like that. Now, some people are talking about education, some people are talking about different topics within different communities, but for me, it's hey, look, who are you? What are you doing? What are you trying to do? What are you trying to accomplish? And how do you get there? And a lot of times people get caught up on that kind of stuff, and there's not really great content out there. Or at least I haven't seen it, right? So I'm going to be hitting those topics. So I'm going to talk about all kinds of stuff. I'm going to talk about community. I'm going to talk about personal growth. I'm going to talk, all kinds of stuff, right? And so that's the DevRev. That's also kind of what I've been looking at for Max Coders. I've had to put that off a little bit because I'm really focused on some other things for the podcast network. But just to put that out there as well, all of this is stuff that I'm thinking about, and I really can't not cover it. So I'm going to talk about it. Now, in this particular instance, and people have been asking me for another rant, right? I went on a rant on the job search. I went on a rant on staying current. Both of those were on JavaScript Jabber and React Roundup, or React Native Radio, excuse me. And people want that kind of content from me too. So I'm going to throw that out there too. I actually don't need the headphones on. I'm going to take them off. So that's the deal, right? So if you're listening to this off of an RSS feed, you're probably just getting the audio, but I am going to put these up on YouTube and Facebook Live and all of that stuff, right? So if you're on any of those channels and you're interested in this stuff, then, enjoy. If you want to see the video, that's fine. It's just me talking at my computer. So anyway, and I've got my podcast mic sitting in front of me so that I can hit all that stuff too. So let's just dive in, right? So I titled this one Twitter, Diversity, and Being Nice. And I was initially going to try and talk around the people and around the situation, because I think there are some general principles out there. I'm a little bit worried that people are going to get bogged down in the details of what went on yesterday. It's October 22nd today. I'm a little worried that people are going to get bogged down on what happened. And to a certain degree, I get it, right? I understand. But the issue is that this stuff seems to be occurring more often, and it seems to be occurring in ways that just really are not helpful. And so I want to jump in and talk more about the ideas and principles than I do about the people and the incident. But I don't know how to do that without actually talking about what happened. The other thing is that I'm probably not going to make a ton of people super happy, because I really try and understand people and understand what's going on, and I can see this from both sides. So, I really hesitate a little bit just to dive in that. I'm also looking at my video, and my head's disappearing into the white behind me. It's white balancing it. So I am going to put my headphones back on, just so that you can see, so that my head doesn't fade in. I need to fiddle with lighting, but like I said, primarily I'm going to be aiming for audio, so you're not going to miss a ton on video other than me gesticulating wildly at the camera. All right, so essentially what happened, and I have to preface this by saying that with a lot of the people involved in the situation, I have at a minimum interviewed them for something, right? And at the far end of it, or at the most extreme, I actually co-host podcasts with them. So, that said, it got a little bit personal and I had to back that off. That's why I'm doing it the day after the Twitter blow up instead of the day of, because I didn't want to get in and just be like, you guys are all jerks, right? I didn't want to go after people just because they were going after friends of mine. I really wanted to sit down and say, okay, what's going on here? What's true? What's not? Not necessarily even with what people are saying, but what are the core ideas that we need to be talking about here so that we can have a reasonable explanation with this. I did get tagged into some things on Twitter because, like I said, I'm very closely connected with some of the folks involved. And so for people who, tagged me one way or the other, I'll probably address some of that just because I feel like people are asking me where I come down on a lot of this stuff with some of these folks. And so I'm just going to tell you, right? I don't see any reason to pretend that I believe anything I don't. I also don't see any reason to hide the ball in any way. So yeah, all of that being said, I'm kind of going to dive in a little bit. One other thing just to throw out there as well is that a lot of this happened at the speed of the internet, and I don't know if I've seen everything. The other thing is that Amy, who was involved in this, deleted her Twitter account because she didn't want to deal with it, which is an understandable response, right? It's like, I don't want to be in the middle of this, so yeah, don't deal with it. Turn it off. But it does make it a little bit hard to figure out what everybody said at the beginning. So let's just talk a little bit about this. So essentially it all started when Amy tweeted something to the effect of, I'm glad I'm not learning to be a programmer in 2019 because people are out there and being angry about, and I'm paraphrasing because I don't have it right in front of me, and I'm not going to read tweet by tweet by tweet. I'm going to give you kind of a 5-minute blow by blow, more or less, and then just talk about some of the ideas here and talk about maybe how we can do this better so that we can actually make real progress. Because honestly, and I should put this out here as a caveat too, right? What I care about is the result, right? I want to make, if bad things are happening, how do we make them not happen anymore, right? So when we talk about diversity and somebody comes in and says, well, this person had this experience, how do we make sure that doesn't happen again, right? It's not, but I, at the same time, I'm very much about people's personal freedom. And so how do we do that without infringing on somebody's ability to be themselves, right? So there, and sometimes these ideas conflict. And that's why this is really hard, is because when we're talking about these different things, it's like, yeah, I don't want bad things to happen to people, but I also don't want, I don't want people to get shut down because they have a different idea. I don't want, and so anyway, there are all of these different ideas, and sometimes it's hard to make them just line up and in a way that makes me feel good about the end result. And this one's one of those, right, where it's just like, in a lot of ways, nobody's really right here, right? And Twitter, here's the other caveat that I'm going to throw out here, is that Twitter is absolutely the worst place to have this conversation, okay? That's why I'm doing a video. That's why I'm doing audio, is because then I can talk through the ideas and I can give you the nuance. But 140 or 280 characters on Twitter is just not enough to give you the full spectrum of the thought or idea that I put out there. And so I see things put poorly on Twitter all the time. I'm also going to tell you that there was one incident, and I think it was about somebody put out, the problem they had with people saying that pornography was bad, right? And so I had to respond to that because I was an idiot, right? And so I responded on Twitter. This was back in the 140 character days, right? And so I botched my response, and he botched his response back to me, and it was terrible. Right? Because we couldn't give any context. We couldn't give any nuance. And so, I'm just going to put that out there too. Yeah, I'm kind of rambling a little bit, but I'm setting all this up so you can kind of understand where I think we could do better with this stuff, right? So anyway, Amy posted the post. And I could tell that people had responded because the captures that Kim Creighton put up, she was the one that went after Amy at one point. I don't know if she was initially responding to her or not, because again, that's a little bit hard to find. But so she posted like 3 tweets. One was the original tweet, and then 2 were responses to her that she put up to other people. And then she basically attacked Amy for not recognizing the immense privilege that she has in the tech community. Here's another issue, is I don't know if I can completely separate how people are acting from the arguments that they make. I'm going to try not to cast judgment necessarily on the diversity arguments. I'm really going to be trying to talk about how we talk to each other about these arguments, right? I may do another episode where I talk about some of this stuff. I probably will. I really don't know that I can put it off that much longer. I tend not to like to have it out with people, but at this point, it's become readily apparent too, with the way that this went down, that I don't think anybody's safe. Eventually, they're going to come after you, right? Whether you agree with them or not, you're going to say something poorly, which is what I think Amy did here, and they're going to come after you. Or, you're going to say something that's not quite in the mainstream thought of that particular thread, and they're going to come after you. And that doesn't make them wrong on the points that they're making. It doesn't make them right either. But the reality is that if we don't change the way we're talking about this stuff, then it's just going to turn into a shouting match every time somebody does something that's not quite in line. And that's something that I really deeply worry about, right? So she poorly stated some things, and some people said, well, assume good intent. And then the response, from Kim and others was, assuming good intent is earned, and you can't always just assume good intent. And the issue there for me is that I know her, right? And so I can assume good intent because I know, right? I know where she's coming from. I know her well enough to look at that and go, I think I know what's going on here. I know what she's trying to say. And like I said, it may not have been stated super well, but that's where I'm coming from. And so, I see it, and, it felt really, really unfair to go after Amy for these particular issues, because I think she was ultimately trying to tell people, look, you're angry and it doesn't help. So how do we help you be less angry? And, and I'm putting words into her mouth. So, take that all with a grain of salt. But the whole point is, and I agree to that degree, right, is that we need to actually be able to communicate about this stuff. We need to talk about this stuff. And having these things come out in the way that they do really hurts a lot of people who are trying to figure out what's going on. And I think it does scare people off when they come in and they see this big fight over something like this, instead of saying, hey, look, we recognize that sometimes things aren't fair. And so what we're going to, these are the steps we're taking to try to make things better, and then to have conversations about that. The other thing is, and this is something that I've seen, as I looked through Kim. Now, I interviewed Kim at a conference a few years ago. So, I've met her too. She was very friendly when we talked, And again, I think a lot of these people are coming from different places, different backgrounds, and they see things differently. And so they respond in specific ways or react in specific ways. And I think some of them are helpful and some of them aren't. So I'm just going to, dive into this. But it seems like Kim, at least lately, has really been out there to try and she actually has a hashtag for this, to create a scene. And that really does not move the conversation forward. And even if you're looking at, I think she had a tweet that essentially said, well, these big changes don't come without a revolution. But the reality is that for some of this, it builds and builds and builds and builds and builds. People kind of come around to the right way of thinking about it. And then we see action happen, and it's not violent, right? Now, some of it, is somewhat violent. We have people that go out and protest, and they kind of get in the way of things, and, stuff like that. And, they're forcing the issue as far as being heard, and that's fair, right? I mean, we saw protests for civil rights. We've seen protest, for women and for, black people. We saw it, and I think a lot of it was necessary, putting bricks through windows and things like that. it's a turnoff for a lot of people because all they see is the violence instead of the actual, people going out and protesting, and so I see, people like Martin Luther King and some of these other folks where they were saying, look, let's get together, let's make sure we're heard, but they weren't getting violent. And so people saw and heard their message, right? And the message was, you're not treating us fairly. And so when I see these things, I'm thinking, okay, all of this violence is distracting from the main message. So anyway, this kind of gets us into the first part of things. And then John Sonmez, who's another friend of mine, went out and started fighting back. And I can't, I can't justify what he did. I understand how he felt, and I understand why he responded the way he did. But, I feel like it was more of the same, right? It was more of this same anger, this same, the way that we shut down the conversation. And, I think, and again, I'm speculating about his perspective, but I've talked to enough people and talked to John enough times to where if I had to guess, a lot of this is coming from the fact that it comes along one way, right? All the anger and violence, be it verbal violence or whatever. People come out and they start yelling and screaming and things, So there was bullying going on Twitter that was aimed at Amy. So he came out and he was pushing back in the same way. And, some people feel justified in doing that. I can't get there personally, right? So, I can't condone what he did, but at the same time, I feel like I understand at least a little bit as to why he would do it, right? So that again, so people are out there, being bullies on Twitter, and so his response is to act the same way. And again, I don't see that it really moves the conversation forward, right? It if you're out there trying to win the argument, then you need to actually win the argument, right? You need to have the argument. And instead, what wound up happening is more people piled on and started yelling back. And so at the end of this, all people know is that there was a big kerfuffle on Twitter that had something to do with diversity and doesn't actually help the cause at all. The other thing is that if you want to win people like me over, right? Because on some of this stuff, I heartily disagree. On some of this stuff, I heartily agree. And some of this stuff I'm on the fence on. But I don't want to talk about it because I either get attacked for the things I disagree on, or I get lumped in with the people who are doing the attacking when I do agree with them, right? And for the stuff in the middle, I get it from both sides. And so we can't have a conversation about this stuff because people are out there, ginning up a whole bunch of people to yell and scream and have this big mob online. And in the end, the conversation is about that there was this to do on Twitter. And so nothing happens. Everybody's a little bit more frustrated and nobody wins, right? So, what do you do, right? And the other thing is then we get people on both sides saying, well, you need to disavow any relationship you have with these people. I had people basically tell me to quit being friends with Amy. I had people telling me to quit being friends with John. I did an interview and have had some association with Ken Wheeler in the React community when this happened a couple months ago. That's the other reason why I'm speaking up, is because it's not even been 2 months, right? It used to happen every year or 6 months, and it's like such and such a thing at this conference, right? So, you got PyCon or you've got LambdaCon or whatever. And, and so it's like, okay, well, I'm just keep my head down because this thing's going to blow over, right? The other thing is that I went through a lot of this stuff with Ruby Rogues. And so I feel like I understand at least some of, being attacked online, and I know how it feels. And so I know what these folks are going through, But so people are telling me, well, you've got to just cut ties completely with these folks. And my problem is that my relationship with them is not predicated on any of this stuff, right? Now, I'm going to have a conversation with John, right? I'm going to have a conversation with Amy, and we're going to figure out where we come down. And at the end of the day, we'll make a judgment call, right? But whether or not I decide to stay friends with them is none of anybody else's business, right? I had one person say, well, part of the reason why I left Ruby Rogues and that I'm okay with it is because of Chuck's association with John. And John said some things that I felt like were out of line that caused a lot of that. But we're still friends, right? He wasn't 100% wrong. The way he said it probably wasn't the best way to put it. But, it all comes down to, okay, well, what kind of relationship do I have with these folks? What does it actually mean? And at the end of the day, is it something that is it something that I can deal with or not, right? Is it something that I'm comfortable making a call on or not? But, then it's my call, right? It's not yours. You have no idea what I get from being a friend with John. You have no idea what I get from being a friend with Amy. I'll tell you right now that I told Amy that she's welcome to continue to be a host on JavaScript Jabber. And that I wanted her to come back, right? Because, as soon as it went down, I was texting her and, hey, you okay? And, I checked in on her, because I'm her friend, right? I didn't pass any judgment on anything she said because that's not what I was about at the time. But just looking at things, I'm fine with the relationship the way it is. And I don't feel like she was out of line. With John, again, we'll have a conversation. We'll see where we come down. But I don't foresee that relationship changing much either. And the reason is because if we cut everybody out of our life who's associated with things that we don't like, you're not going to have very many friends left. Everybody disagrees with you on something. And the other thing is that as I talk to more and more people, I think most of us agree on probably 75% of stuff, right? We want people to feel safe. We want people to be okay. We want people to be happy. We want, all of this stuff, but we get so caught up on these other things. And yeah, some of them have to be fixed, right? Some of them are real problems. But we're not going to be able to fix those until we can see each other as people and deal with each other at that level. And so, I know that this isn't going to make a whole lot of folks happy with me. I really don't care at this point. I feel like I need to come out and just let people know where I'm at with these issues. But yeah, if you want to know my stance on whatever issue with diversity or with whatever, just ask me. I'll tell you, right? That I'm not hiding anything here. The other thing is that in my experience, a lot of this stuff in a couple weeks, nobody's going to be talking about it anymore. When the stuff went down with Ruby Rogues, because I was personally directly involved, I decided not to say anything. And guess what? After 2 weeks, yeah, there were some people still asking on Reddit or whatever, well, what happened on Ruby Rogues? And anybody who asked me directly, I just told them. But for the rest, I didn't get approached. I had a whole bunch of people demonize me. I had a couple of actual podcast guests cancel on me. I kept the show going on my own for a few weeks while I found new people to come on the show. But at the end of the day, I just don't see this as a career ender for anybody. And the fact that people are coming out and trying to do that, right? So, especially with John, and again, I'm not justifying what he did, but at the same time, they're out there and they're saying, well, don't buy his book, don't, this or that or the other. And I don't see the point in any of it. I don't understand. If his book has stuff in it that's going to help you, go get it, right? And if it doesn't, then don't. And if this stuff really bothers you, then don't buy it. That's fine, right? But at the end of the day, this idea too that you conflate people with whoever they associate with is nuts. It's nuts. You're friends with somebody who's a bad person, so you must be a bad person too. Okay, well, now that I've been painted with the bad person brush, anybody that's associated with me is therefore a bad person. And, let's just carry that out to its natural conclusion. Everybody's a bad person. Nobody's safe. And the thing is I've seen people who have been out there advocating for this kind of, I hate the term social justice because it means so many different things to different people. But I've seen people out there that advocate for, diversity and inclusion and things like that. And for a lot of this, I really do agree with them. But then they say just the wrong thing and they get nailed for it. And it's not helpful, right? They were a friend. They were an ally. And they got hit. So nobody's safe. And that's the problem. You have a lot of people who aren't willing to stand up and speak up. And the reason is because they never know if they're next. And if you go in and you actually manage to take all the people out who don't agree, and then you go find all the people who aren't sure and take them out too, it's not going to solve the problem. It's not. And trying to convince us, me included, that because I don't agree with you on every single point that I'm part of the problem, well, that just makes me not want to talk to you, which isn't healthy for either of us. And so this whole thing is just, it's frustrating to watch. And this idea that we're just going to go out and all of us are going to pile on and try and ruin somebody's reputation so that they can't make money or they can't hold down their career or, whatever, or going after and ruining somebody's, day or week or year because you want to prove a point, it doesn't help. Because again, at the end of the day, it's just going to be like, well, I better watch out for that person. And, I'm going to let this other person over here know that I've got their back and that, and then we all go to our camps and it just gets worse. So yeah, I mean, I'm happy to have conversations with people. I'm happy to see what they've seen. I'm happy to see what their experience is. I want to understand. But the problem is that the second that we start having this conversation, unless it's somebody that's been a friend of mine for a long time, that is willing to sit down with me and say, okay, this is what you don't understand, every other time it turns into somebody just beat me over the head with what I'm supposed to be doing. And guess what? If I don't believe it, if I don't understand it, if I don't have those core beliefs, I'm not going to buy in. And if I don't buy in, I'm not going to do something because I'm afraid that you're going to be mad at me for not doing it. I've never done that, and I'm not going to. So anyway, I don't know what else to say other than let's just step back and have a conversation. If you have a problem with something that I said, sit me down and talk to me about it and explain why I'm wrong. But if you're going to go on these ad hominem attacks and you're going to attack people because they don't believe what you believe, and you're going to try and convince me that they're a bad person, well, that doesn't make them wrong. What it makes them is a victim of your bullying because you're trying to prove that they're a bad person and therefore all of the things that they say are wrong. But it turns out that you probably agree with them on 60, 70% of things. And so at the end of the day, are they wrong on everything? No. In your opinion, they're wrong on the things that they don't agree with you on. But that doesn't make them wrong. And it doesn't make you right for going after them. Anyway, I don't know what else to say that's really going to make a difference. The main issue here, though, is that if we want to move these things forward, and some of these things are just going to take time, too, right? You can push a little bit, see if you can get them to accelerate, see if you can get them to move. But at the end of the day, we got to talk to each other. We got to understand each other, right? So these issues, right, where it's, I don't understand why people are so angry. Well, explain it to me. Maybe it's justified. Right? But, in a lot of cases, I see the anger and I don't see the justification. And so then this stuff comes up and you're angry with me for not understanding why you're angry, instead of sitting down and explaining to me why you're angry. And I've had a few people basically say, yeah, well, these people have been victimized by the system, and they're going to be victimized again by explaining it to you. But the reality is that if I'm not in that situation, I will not understand it unless somebody walks me through it. So, that may not be fair. I could probably make an argument either way as to whether it's fair. But it's the reality, right? For me, it's about the outcome. And so the reality is that if you want me on your side, then you have to make me understand. And if you want to make me understand, you've got to walk me through it. Right? So walk me through it. Talk me through it. Talk me through the situation. Talk me through what's going on. Help me understand what really happens in your world. And if it's different from what happens in my world, then I have a better idea, right? And then I can go, yeah, you're justified in feeling the way you do and in acting the way you do. But until then, you're just driving people away. And then you have all the other people that tend to agree with you basically coming in and patting you on the back. And none of that gets us any closer to making things any better. So, yeah, I mean, that's more or less what I have to say. I think the whole idea of, cutting these people out of your life or whatever, I don't think that's productive. I don't know if I'm going to change anybody's mind. I don't know if I care. But one way or the other, that's kind of, that's where we need to be. And I'm open to having my mind changed. The problem is that when you start yelling at me, I quit listening. And so if you want that difference, if you want me to understand what's going on, you've got to tell me about it. And yeah, I mean, it's hard, right? It's people. And people believe different things for different reasons. People go through different things in their lives. People experience different things differently. And, I sympathize with a lot of it. And I want to understand it. But, in the meantime, we've got to get there together. Anyway, I'm going to quit rambling on about this. But yeah, if you want me to be part of the conversation, then dragging me in and saying, your association with this person isn't okay, it's not going to get me there. I'm going to make those decisions for my own reasons. If you have a problem with something that somebody else said that I'm associated with, then explain to me why they're wrong. If you have a problem with something I said, explain to me why I'm wrong. Honestly, I'm way more interested in you being mad at me for what I said than what anybody else said. But tiptoeing around these issues isn't solving anything, because then I don't get to understand this stuff. And you yelling at people doesn't solve it either, because then they're just going to tune you out until you're done. And I've talked to a lot of people outside of Twitter about these different situations, and I've heard a lot of different things, but the thing that's really, kind of overwhelmingly apparent is that there are a lot of people on both sides that don't want to be involved. And so they're keeping their mouths shut. And it's unfortunate there too, not because they're keeping their mouths shut, but because then they're going to miss some of the opportunities to have people actually explain to them what's going on and why. So anyway, what I really hope, I guess, is that, we can actually have these conversations and figure this stuff out. I will admit that I'm a little bit skeptical that we will actually get there. But, maybe a few of the people who are involved will actually be willing to sit down and have a conversation about it. So anyway, I'm pretty much done. I'm going to wrap this one up. And yeah, I'll come back with probably another thought and rant and whatever. And max out, everybody.